I'm not a big believer in hyperscaling just for the sake of hyperscaling. I know that can make sense, and maybe it makes sense for some of them and it will work out, but for others it doesn't. It's not like our costs went down accordingly, because we still had to pay rents, we still had to pay internet, we still had to pay the people who we had hired to manage the offices were still on our payroll, obviously. So that really required, very quickly, when we realized this is not a short-term problem, this is going to be a substantial amount of time, we had to then, we understood, looking at our numbers, if we continue down this path, if we don't do something, we will run out of money in 3-4 months.
Hi everyone, welcome to Scaling Today, the podcast where we explore how companies scale and also the future of work. I'm your host Yu Ying, and today I have a fascinating episode lined up for you with an entrepreneur that I really admire, Nicolas. So Nicolas Bivero, he's the CEO and co-founder of Penbrothers. Penbrothers is a leading offshoring company in the Philippines. I've been following Nicolas actually for a while on LinkedIn, and I've always admired the very strong sense of mission that he brings to the Philippine startup ecosystem while building Penbrothers. So I'm very excited to have him on this episode. I feel that there's a lot that we can actually learn from his journey, how he actually bootstrapped Penbrothers over 10 years and scaled this up to 350 employees spread out throughout the Philippines. And all the while, he has stayed very true to his mission-driven approach. So welcome to the show, Nicolas. Would you like to say a few words to our audience?
Yeah, no, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure having me here. I think this is a very interesting opportunity of continuing our conversation we had the other day when we met
Yes.
in Singapore. At the end of the day, happy to be here, happy to explain a little bit more about how we started and how we went about it. Just to correct you one thing, we're not 350 employees. We're actually over 1,000 employees across the Philippines. So it's a little bit bigger than that, but does
That's
make a difference.
triple the size. Sorry about that.
Yeah, don't worry. Don't worry.
Okay. All right. So, Nicolas, I think one thing, when we were at Tiong Bahru Bakery, I think one thing that really struck me, right, was your background and how you actually got started with Penbrothers. So, could you share a bit about your background, and specifically what inspired you to co-found Penbrothers, and what was your initial vision for the company?
Okay, let me start with the background and try to get this done smoothly and swiftly without spending too much time on it. Yeah, I'm complicated. So as you can see, I'm not Filipino, I'm not Asian, but I've been living in Asia for 20 years, and that was by pure luck that I ended up in Japan when I was 22, 23, 24. But I'm originally from South America and German. So I'm a mixed person. My mother's German, my father's from Venezuela. I grew up mainly in South America with a few years in Germany. Had the opportunity to then study in Switzerland, and then from there decided to do an internship in Japan. And I was very lucky. I got very lucky that I actually got a company to offer me an internship. That was not a given because I didn't speak any Japanese at that time.
That was what I wanted to ask. No Japanese.
No Japanese. My knowledge of Japanese was konnichiwa, and that's pretty much it. So, but I got really, really fortunate and very thankful and grateful for that I had the opportunity of working for a Japanese company in Japan. So that I was the only foreigner at that time. That was a little bit scary. I spent the first 2 weeks sitting there thinking, what am I doing here and why am I here? And I don't think they know what to do with me. But it was fascinating. It was very interesting. And then out of that internship, actually, it ended up being in total an 18-year engagement. So I worked for them for 18 years.
For the same company?
And that was fascinating. Same company, same Japanese company. Yeah, it's a logistic service provider for oil and chemicals. Very old school, almost 170 years old, family-owned business. And they gave me the opportunity to work in their regional Southeast Asia expansion, replicating what they did in Japan in Southeast Asia. And Philippines very quickly became one of the main countries where we started focusing our efforts for various reasons. The market, the partnerships we had here already, so the people we knew, but also, to be very honest, the Filipinos itself. Filipinos are people who are very easy and smooth to work with, and very welcoming. So that made it very easy, even for a Japanese company. It made it much easier to do business here than maybe in some other countries in Southeast Asia. So we started building between other Southeast Asian countries, we were focusing strongly on the Philippines, and that's how I ended up going back and forth. First based from Japan,
Mm-hmm.
and then in 2011, the Japanese company actually sent me over here to take over our local operations, and that's how I ended up here in 2011. And so that experience of building companies together with our Filipino joint venture partner and hiring
Mm-hmm.
Filipino teams, growing Filipino teams, and delivering a service with a Filipino team is what inspired me, or what, well, on the one hand inspired me, but on the other hand also gave me the courage to actually set
Mm-hmm.
up Penbrothers. And so Penbrothers itself came out of an opportunity, again, a lucky opportunity where my best friend and also co-founder of Penbrothers
Mm-hmm.
had raised Series A in his
Mm-hmm.
own startup,
Okay.
and he was looking to grow his team using that funds he had raised. And he needed a very diverse group of people. He needed software developers, he needed
Mm-hmm.
accountants, salespeople, lead generation. He needed content moderators, Photoshop editors. So it's a very diverse pool of
Mm.
people he needed. And I recommended to him the Philippines based on the experience I had gained with the Japanese,
Mm. And your
building
co-founder,
teams.
was he based in the Philippines or was he based
No, not at all.
elsewhere?
He was visiting me. So we were hanging out in
Ah, I
Boracay,
see.
actually, in the
Okay.
beach and talking about this. And he was telling me about his problem, and I was telling him about my experience
I
with
see.
Filipinos.
So this was
And
actually an
basic,
offshore team that he got through you in the Philippines to
exactly, yeah. So
help
he's
his
the first
business.
client. Exactly. So we set this up together as
Mm.
with him, the first client. So he
Mm-hmm.
was the first client. He hired three people initially, initially as freelancers, to be very honest. So to try it
Mm.
out, to see if really my recommendation of the Filipinos was based on any factual truth.
Mm-hmm.
He really enjoyed and liked the people he hired, and some of them are
Mm.
still with him. I think out of the
Oh,
three,
wow.
two are still with him. That's
Okay.
10 years later.
Okay.
And that's how it started. And then we incorporated properly the company. We made sure that we bring in our own HR, our own little office space. So the building where I'm right now,
Mm-hmm.
so this is the fourth floor, but in the fifth floor of this building, that's where we originally started 10 years ago.
Mm.
We still have an office there.
Mm-hmm.
And we had home internet because we didn't know better. We had to figure it out, and that's how we started. But the courage of actually doing this came from the experience with the Japanese
Mm.
employer of mine before, of building teams in the Philippines for our
Mm-hmm.
operations in the
Mm-hmm.
Philippines. Yeah.
Mm. That's great. So you translated that experience into actually, the business kind of know-how that you needed to set up an offshoring company, right?
Correct. I mean, the experience of knowing how good and hardworking and dedicated and qualitatively high qualitative the Filipinos are. So that's the
Mm.
one side of the spectrum. But also my experience of actually, by that time, almost 10 years of building operations in the Philippines, because the
Mm-hmm.
experience that exposed me to was the knowledge about you need to do things correctly with HR. You need to do things correctly with the taxation, with the social
Mm.
security. You need to have a
Mm.
good team to manage the people, because at the end of the day, it's not only about finding the talent, it's about making sure that when you employ them,
Mm-hmm.
they are properly taken care of.
Mm. So
And
that you can retain
also,
them. Yeah.
well, retain them and make sure that they're not frustrated, so that you're a good employer, not just any
Mm.
random employer, but you're a good, decent employer, making sure that they get the proper payment, the proper social security,
Mm.
also a proper health insurance, and so on and so forth. So that knowledge, and the knowledge also of the sometimes difficulties of doing business in the Philippines, helped me a
Mm-hmm.
lot to have, as I said, the courage, but also the knowledge of how to execute this, and,
Mm-hmm.
and what resources to tap. I mean, I was not completely a newbie to setting
Mm-hmm.
up businesses and operations in the Philippines. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So Nicholas, one thing that I really admire about what you did, right, was that you did everything of what you did without any external funding. So you have grown very impressively without external funding. This is pretty rare in today's landscape. What actually motivated you to bootstrap the company instead of raising funding? And how did you navigate the challenges of growing your team without external capital?
What motivated me is a good question. I think what motivated us, both of us, my co-founder and
Mm-hmm.
me, was the fact that we did not believe this is a model you can hyperscale.
Mm-hmm.
If you start hyperscaling this model, so raising funds to just grow, grow, grow,
Mm-hmm.
I think you can grow, definitely. I don't think that's the challenge. The challenge is how to operationalize it without blowing up, without basically providing a bad service, without
Mm-hmm.
starting to have real issues on the people, the systems and whatnot. So because we are dealing with humans, at the end of the day, I'm an employer. I hire 1,000 people. For us, it was very important that we do this correctly,
Mm-hmm.
that we provide the employees, our employees, a good service from an HR perspective, but that we also provide our clients a good service. So it's not just, oh, sure, I hire you whatever I can find and let's figure out if this works. It's like really trying to provide from the get-go a good service. So for me, the quality, or for us, the quality of service and doing it correctly was way more important than just hyperscaling, because
Mm-hmm.
the mindset we have, and we still believe this strongly, is if the quality is good, if the service is good, the growth would follow. It will
Mm-hmm.
follow because we will get recommended, because people will
Mm.
hear from
Word
us
of
and come
mouth.
to us.
Yes.
Yes, exactly. And this is really what we see. Whereas the hyperscaling is great in certain models, but in our model, I think we thought it was too dangerous. It was too much
Mm-hmm.
of a risk, because if it goes wrong, we would have we would damage a lot of things, and we would also damage the humans that we actually hire. And that's not
Mm-hmm.
something we feel comfortable with. So hyperscaling was never a plan. Therefore, growing slower, but
Mm-hmm.
with our own funds and by bootstrapping the company, was something we
Mm-hmm.
felt much more comfortable with, to be very
Mm-hmm.
honest.
Okay. So you basically grew this through like revenues and profits that you had accumulated from previous years. And so that
Well, yes.
moderated the growth a bit, correct?
Yes, yes.
Yes.
So the growth was also moderated initially the first years, because in the
Mm.
first years, building remote teams was not that common. Let's put it this
Mm.
way. I mean, we found
For sure.
clients, we had people
Yeah.
coming over, but it wasn't as common as it's nowadays. So actually,
Mm-hmm.
COVID, to be very honest, as COVID was very, very tough, but at the same time, COVID was also very, very good,
Mm-hmm.
because it enabled everybody to work remotely and to have that experience. So now we don't have to explain it anymore. Now that's a given.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's more about why us, why the Philippines.
Mm-hmm.
But pre-COVID, our growth was by default much slower, because it took much longer to actually find clients who were willing to do to work with companies like us in the Philippines. It wasn't because we're not a BPO. So BPOs,
Mm-hmm.
they have been around for a long time. We
Mm-hmm.
built remote teams.
Mm-hmm.
So it is within that spectrum, but it's a different type of
Sort of like
offshoring.
adjacent kind of market, right? That you are in.
Correct. Correct. Yeah. It has the advantages of the outsourcing, in the sense that you're hiring people remotely.
Mm-hmm.
So you can take advantage of a different talent pool, a larger talent pool, and also, to be very honest, potentially a less expensive talent pool compared to your
Yes.
home country. But it has also the advantage that you're not actually rolling over your processes and saying like,
Mm-hmm.
just get it done, but
Mm-hmm.
that you actually build a remote team and you keep control over the processes and the quality. So
Mm-hmm.
it requires more involvement from our
Mm-hmm.
clients, but at the
Mm-hmm.
same time, you retain much more control and quality. So it is an extension of your team, just remotely in the Philippines.
Mm-hmm. So essentially, it does become your team, like after a
It
certain
is
period
it
of
is
time,
it is
right?
a dual function.
Yes.
So they are our employees, but they're signed to our clients fully. We don't move them around. So they are an extension of our client. So the people have a dual hat, so to speak. Yeah, they're
Mm.
Penbrothers, but they're also members of the client.
Mm.
And we do our best to make them feel that way. So by doing team building within the
Mm.
client group, by having offices for some of our clients where there is the merch, like they have their name
Mm-hmm.
and their logos and their vision and mission and core values. So they essentially become employees of ours, who are also in a way employees of our clients, without
Mm-hmm.
actually being really employees of our clients. But from
Mm.
all sense and purposes, from a day-to-day operational perspective, they are our clients' employees, so to speak.
Mm. Okay, got it. And we spoke about this, during the coffee that we had as well, right? And this was something that really struck me. You told me that Penn Brothers had a near-death experience during COVID, right, where you actually had to make some pretty tough decisions. Could you take us back to those challenging days? What was going through your mind, as you had to make those decisions, and how did you steer the company away from a crisis into a recovery? And I understand an even stronger kind of revenue position today.
I mean, I think COVID, and I might be wrong, but I would assume COVID was very difficult for most companies on this planet.
Hmm.
Um, in our particular case, pre-COVID, about 50 to 60% of our revenues were actually generated by co-working. The
Hmm.
reason for that is when we started in 2014, WeWork was not yet in the Philippines, and
Mm-hmm.
other co-working companies were not yet in the Philippines. I think the only one who existed was one called A Spaces, and then there was another, and then obviously Regis. But
Hmm.
Regis was completely
That was
unaffordable.
corporate. Yes.
Correct, that was corporate. So for us to grow, we had to build our own offices. And every time we built a new, larger office, we would have a certain percentage of that office earmarked for our clients who would hire people with us.
Hmm.
But then the rest of the office, let's say 60% or even sometimes more, we would then sell as co-working offices, which
Hmm.
had a good uptake because there was no WeWork at that time. WeWork
Hmm.
only came in about 2018, 19, I think, thereabouts in the Philippines.
Hmm.
So when COVID happened, as I said, about 50 to 55% of our revenues were co-working. And when
That's
COVID happened,
huge. Yeah.
that was quite large. The whole co-working died, partially because companies didn't need it anymore,
Hmm.
partially because the government didn't allow it, to be very honest.
Mm.
So there was a very substantial amount of time where the government in the Philippines did not allow people to go back to the office. And only when they allowed it again, it was only 50% utilization.
Hmm.
And then by that time, there was so much fear in the Philippines that also the employees didn't want to come to the office anymore. So
Hmm.
that means that from one day to another, our 55% of our revenues disappeared. Like
Mm.
they dried up.
Virtually
And
overnight.
so,
Yes.
particularly overnight, but it's not like our costs went down accordingly
Hmm.
because we still had to pay rents, we still had to pay internet, we still had to pay the people who we had hired to manage the offices were still on our payroll, obviously.
Hmm.
So that really required very quickly when we realized this is not a short term problem, this is going to be a substantial amount of time. We had to then, I mean, we understood looking at our numbers, if we continue down this path, if we don't do something,
Yeah.
we will run out of money in 3, 4 months.
Hmm.
And that is something which is obviously unacceptable. Also because we by that time we had about 500 employees on our payroll,
Wow.
so
Okay.
that would risk their job.
Hmm.
So not something we could allow to happen. So we had to take drastic measures. I mean, we had to let go of about more than half of our office footprint by negotiating with our landlords
Hmm.
on how to let it go. We managed to, for the rest of them, to actually reduce our lease rates. We had to negotiate with all our service providers
Hmm.
um, to see how to reduce the cash burn at that time. Um, we had to also, unfortunately, restructure part of our team because when you let go of half of
Mm.
your office space,
Yeah.
then some people will
It
become
just
redundant.
follows. Yeah.
It follows by default. It's extremely unfortunate, and we tried to retain as many as we could.
Hmm.
And the Philippine government, to be honest, did allow us some tools that allowed us to retain people with less pay, less work, less pay. They called it no work, no pay. So you would put them on, for example, 2 days work, 3 days
Okay.
no work, and
Yeah.
then you wouldn't pay them for that. So there were different schemes you could use, but it
Hmm.
was brutal, and it were decisions that we didn't take lightly because at the end of the day, whichever way you look at it, there were always human livelihoods depending on
Hmm.
it, and
Hmm.
and that's I think the most brutal or tough part of this. But it had to be done, otherwise, you would have 500 people without a job suddenly, and
Mm.
that was not acceptable. So that required us to really change our business model. So nowadays, 4 years later, so to speak,
Hmm.
co-working only makes about 5% of our revenues, if at all.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very small portion of our revenues. We completely shifted and fully into the building remote teams for our clients and focusing on that market.
Mm-hmm.
It accelerated a decision we had taken pre-COVID. Actually, 2019, we already decided because WeWork was coming in that
Mm-hmm.
co-working is going to die for us. We cannot
Yeah.
compete with WeWork,
Yeah.
but we were not planning to shut
Do
that
it so
down or
soon.
to reduce it that fast. And then suddenly, well, COVID didn't give us a choice. So
Mm-hmm.
that's part of what we had to do to survive. Yeah.
Well, it was a tough decision, but it does seem that the revenue stream is a lot more stable right now, right? With a different kind of business model. So
Yeah, I
silver
mean,
lining, I
it is.
guess.
It is a silver lining, but it was not easy. I mean, again, I think what COVID did for us, besides really focusing on our core product, which is then the employment of people and the building of remote teams, instead of also doing the co-working side, is that, as I said, COVID in because companies had to work remotely globally for at least a certain amount of time, the whole remote work question now is not a question anymore. So that
Mm-hmm.
is a real silver lining for us and everybody else in our industry, to be very honest.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Ourselves included as well, because we are also in the similar space. So,
Mm.
Nicholas, a question for you, right? And we spoke about this during our coffee session. So, the offshoring space that Penbrothers is in is adjacent to a lot of, the major players in the EOR space. So, employee of record space like Deal, Remote.com and Multiplier. And all of them have raised very significant venture funding and have also expanded globally as well. Now, you've chosen a different path by focusing on the Philippines, and I understand that some of your customers had also requested you to do like overseas hiring for them outside of the Philippines, but you've chosen not to. Can you walk us through the rationale behind this like strategic decision?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are various points here. Number one is we chose from a very early point that quality is more important than quantity. So that is
Mm-hmm.
something that is part of our vision and mission, is really how to provide a high quality service to our clients.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we looked at it, and when we got some clients saying, "Oh, can you also hire for me people in Indonesia or Vietnam or Malaysia?" To be fair, we looked at it and we're like, "Well, does this make sense?" But we very quickly realized that, at least for us, it is not the path we wanted to take at that point in time, and also for the next future or for the foreseeable future is not something we're too keen or interested in exploring,
Mm-hmm.
because we don't have the management capabilities. We don't have also the knowledge. I'm not a specialist in Indonesia or Malaysia or Vietnam. I'm a specialist in the Philippines. The team I have built, we are specialized in the Philippines.
Mm-hmm.
That's number one. So growing quickly globally or regionally even, um, in my opinion, can very quickly lead to the problem I mentioned a while ago. You do a lot of activity, but you don't do it
Mm-hmm.
at a good quality, at a high qualitative service. So that might very quickly become problematic.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Again, I'm not a big believer in hyperscaling just for the sake of hyperscaling. I know that can make sense, and maybe it makes sense for some of them and it will work out, but for others it doesn't. The second reason why we also decided against it is we believe at the end of the day that there's still a very large potential of people, of good qualitatively high quality people in the Philippines.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of just going and saying like, "Sure, I can hire you two here, three there, or whatnot," it's like, no, no, let's focus on the Philippines. Like, what is it you need? What talent
Mm-hmm.
do you require? And let's
Mm-hmm.
really try to find you the right talent at a good quality in the Philippines, because Philippines happens to have 110 million people and a lot of
Mm-hmm.
young people and a lot of good
Yeah.
quality. So it's more about focusing on that. And the third part is, I think, and I might be wrong, that when you scale more regionally or even globally, you need to focus on a certain element of the service. You can't do
Mm-hmm.
everything. I don't
Mm-hmm.
think that's feasible. So in our case, we decided to be an EOR with a lot of adjacent services and bells and whistles. So we have
Mm-hmm.
our own recruitment team for our clients. So we work very closely with our clients in the recruitment process, and we can
Mm-hmm.
adjust our recruitment process to the needs of our clients. We have a very strong HR support team so that we become the HR business partner of our clients in the Philippines and can
Mm-hmm.
offer accordingly those services. We have a strong customer success team that works closely with our clients to understand what are the problems, what are the struggles, how can we continue to help, what else would the client want to have. So those are all services that add a lot of value
Mm-hmm.
because we want to add that value. We want to be that partner to our clients. I don't think, but I'm not too familiar also. I don't use them, but I don't think that's what a standard global EOR or platform does. You can
Mm-hmm.
employ your people, you can make sure that they pay the salaries, but I think that's pretty much it. They
Mm-hmm.
don't help you with the recruitment. They don't help you with the offboarding. They don't help you with learning and development. They don't help you with other things. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's great. It's a product which has value in itself if you have a
Mm-hmm.
very distributed team. But if you really want to build in our opinion, if you want to build a team that is really like an extension of yourself with the highest possible quality, then you need a good partner to do that. Not just somebody who pays the payroll. So
Mm-hmm.
that was we decided to go the qualitative way instead of the quantitative way, and
Mm.
I think both of them have advantages and disadvantages.
Yep, I think that's amazing because that's a very conscious decision, right, on your side to do this. And it's not like, okay, you saw, this hyperscaling venture capital mode and you decided that, okay, I have to do that as well. So I think, it's something that all entrepreneurs and all listeners to the podcast can really learn from, like this kind of focus on what your core competitive advantage is.
Yeah, but
Nicholas,
if you
yep.
hyperscale, if you think about it,
Hmm.
Eugene, hyperscaling implies to a degree that the main focus is volume. You need to get the volume constantly and you need to show it to your VCs and your funders. Otherwise,
Hmm.
you're failing in a way.
Hmm.
In our case, the only thing we need to show is honestly high quality. And how do we show this? By having very, very high retention rates of the employees. So
Hmm.
we have a 96% retention rate
Hmm.
by having very low churn rate of clients. So by literally retaining clients for years and building teams with them, by having positive feedback from our clients, our employees, and so on and so forth. It's not always perfect. Of course, we also make mistakes. Of course, there are challenges along the way. But for us, that those are our key matrices. Not just okay, I need to hire as many people as possible every month because otherwise
Hmm.
I'm failing with regards to my hyperscale target. So I'm not saying that's wrong. That's another model. I'm just saying that we chose very consciously to go a different path and a different
Hmm.
route. Maybe we will never be as big as them, but we will be big enough because the market is also gigantic. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's not size, right? That is like, I guess, what's driving you. I think it's
No,
more, it
it's not.
sounds to me that it's more like customer experience, what your customers actually get out of you when they think about Penbrothers. Yeah. So it's not just size and it's not just about growth. I think that's the real differentiator.
Yes, and there is one more element which hasn't come up until now. One part of our vision and mission is that we are trying to create really interesting jobs in the
Hmm.
Philippines without the
Yes.
Filipinos having to leave the Philippines
Mm,
or even having
exactly.
to leave the countryside for the big cities. And again, if the goal is purely volume, that will also lead to a competition about where can I find the cheapest cost people so I can hire quickly.
Hmm.
In our case, that's not the case. In our case, it's the quality. So how can I interest a company in the United States or in Australia or in Singapore or in Europe who is an interesting company to create an interesting job, whatever
Hmm.
that might be, in the Philippines and find the right talent for that. So that also the Filipino has an interesting job with a foreign company, gets exposed, grows as an individual and as a professional, and also gets a really good salary. I mean, relationship wise to the Philippine
Hmm.
standard. So we are it's a very small contribution in generating good jobs, interesting jobs, and minimizing the brain drain.
Hmm.
And that also has to do with our background. Both Guy and I, my co-founder, who's Portuguese, and I, as a half South American, we
Hmm.
come from countries where brain drain is a huge problem. I mean, my country, or Venezuela, in the last 20 years has
Mm.
lost somewhere between 8 to 9 million people, depending on
Yeah, we were
what
talking
news
about
you
that.
read.
Yeah.
Exactly. And Portugal, until not too long ago, was very similar. It would constantly lose qualified people because they couldn't find a good, decent, well paid job in Portugal. it's only in the last maybe 8 years, and that's a maybe, I'm not so sure, could also be only since COVID, that
Mm-hmm.
has shifted, and now people are going to Portugal. So
Mm-hmm.
that's a new development that didn't used to be like that.
Yeah, so that was the mission-driven approach that Nicholas, I was saying that I really admired about you. I
Thank
do
you.
see you writing about it on LinkedIn very often, and I see it on your Penbrothers website as well. So it's yeah, something that I really respect.
Thank you.
Okay. So Nicholas, you are an expert in distributed teams. So many of your clients have embraced such a distributed team kind of setup, right? No thanks to, the kind of method that you have developed through Penn Brothers. So from your experience, what are some of the key considerations that founders should keep in mind when they're trying to implement a distributed team structure?
That's a good question. I think from my perspective, you need to have a certain size or a certain maturity as a
Mm-hmm.
company, as an organization, and as a founder, that a distributed team works well and makes sense. So if you're a
Mm-hmm.
very early startup stage, like you're still trying to figure out your product and your product fit, and you really don't you're still pivoting constantly and trying to make this work, building a remote team will be difficult, because at the
Mm-hmm.
end of the day, that stage of your founder journey requires you to honestly throw things overboard, try out new things, change,
Mm-hmm.
shift. People today are going to do a business plan, tomorrow they need to work on something completely different. So doing that remotely is going to be tough,
Mm-hmm.
because you need that closeness to brainstorm, to quickly change. But
Mm-hmm.
once you have a product that can be sold, or that is selling, and now it's a question more about, okay, how do I grow my company, how do I scale this,
Mm-hmm.
which and how do I operationalize this in a much more professional way. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's where remote teams and distributed teams become much more interesting, for many reasons. I mean, it's first of all because you might not be able to find all the people you need in the vicinity of where you are.
Mm-hmm.
Number two is your funds might not allow you to build the size of the team that you really need, because I mean, you want to, if you're raising funds from a VC, you want to extend that runway as long as possible. So you need to be
Mm-hmm.
also very, very cost conscious about how you
Mm-hmm.
scale your team and how
This
you
was how
build your
your
team.
co-founder actually came into Penn Brothers, right? Because he wanted to
Correct,
extend his
correct.
Series A fundraise.
Yes, it was extension of the Series A, but at the same time also, okay, I need a team. So let's say software development. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
allocating, let's take a number, $500,000 to software development. How can I extract the most out of that 500,000? I can hire maybe two very, very good people in Europe, or I
Mm-hmm.
can hire one good person and then a whole support team remotely in the Philippines, and achieve much more with the
Mm-hmm.
same amount of money. So it's also, how do I extract more value out of the same funds,
Mm-hmm.
by being a little bit more creative, by having a distributed team. Um, then other reasons could be also, you have a product, you're scaling your product, and now you need to provide 24/7 customer service, or 24/7 support,
Mm-hmm. Yes.
or you want to cycle your coding team 24/7 or whatnot. So then also having a distributed team where you take advantage of the time zones could make
Mm-hmm.
sense. So there are different reasons of building a distributed team, but for those reasons to kick in, you need to already be a little bit mature.
Mm-hmm.
You need to have a better clarity. Okay, I have the product now. I'm going to scale this, and to do this, to achieve this, I need to build this team. I need to build this type of operational cycle. And now you start looking at how do I optimize my service delivery by having a distributed team. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that comes in. The other thing we see that very clearly with the clients we're getting. We're very interesting also for more mature companies, not just
Mm-hmm.
startups, but actually
Mm-hmm.
for SMEs, because now SMEs are in a similar situation. How do they look at their org chart, and they look at it and say, like, how do I optimize this from an operational and also cost perspective? So it's a very interesting um, position to be, because what we try to do many times is also to help our clients to ideate through these challenges they're having
Mm-hmm.
and come up with solutions.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting that you said that, right? Because I totally agree with you. I think that there needs to be a certain amount of certainty and structure in place
Mhm.
before you can actually have a distributed team. Otherwise, it's better to just keep everyone close and like ideate along the way and pivot as well. Okay. And, this is also something that you alluded to earlier, right? Which is that Penn Brothers itself has a distributed team throughout the Philippines, correct? So it
Yes.
used to be that everyone was working around Manila, but post COVID, like people are spread out across the Philippines, your own employees. So how do you yourself like maintain a strong and cohesive company culture with such a setup? Were there any kind of initiatives that you've taken or practices that you've had which you found to be very effective in keeping everyone connected and aligned?
Well, to be honest, it's a great question. To be honest, it's something which we're still developing and working on, and it's a
Work in
constant.
progress.
It's a
Yes.
work in progress. It's not easy because having a distributed team, even for ourselves, you need to find creative ways of engaging with everybody and making
Hmm.
also the people feel engaged and feel as part of your team while you don't have the simplicity of just saying like everybody come to the office and therefore we
Hmm.
see each other
And
and
let's
we
have a
and
party.
we
Yes.
exactly. But we do that. So I mean, it starts with the simple things of our HR team doing regular check-ins with all our employees.
Hmm.
Um, that's both scheduled and unscheduled to really make sure that we understand what is happening with our remote team members. Then we do online events. We do also face-to-face events.
Hmm.
At least 2 times a year, we do bigger events where we fly people over.
Okay.
So our HR team, together with other departments, are trying to be very creative and to
Hmm.
come up with ideas and solutions.
Hmm.
Um, that's on the engagement side, which is very important. On the operational side, I mean, we did have to build during COVID and after COVID different a different type of operational team who makes sure the internet is working, who can troubleshoot
Mm.
remotely issues with internet, with computers, with peripherals,
Hmm.
and so on and so forth. So things that you didn't have to have a team
Even
like
think
that when
about,
you were
right?
still in the
Yes.
office. Yeah, you didn't, because people were in the office, they would just walk over and say like, hey,
Hmm.
I have an internet problem.
Hmm.
Whereas here you need to have different capabilities and you need to build those capabilities, and then it's not always that easy. I mean, another challenge we had was, okay, how do we manage the inventory of
Hmm.
all our equipment
Hmm.
when we have a team which is distributed across the whole country? How do we manage also? I mean, within our IT operations team, we have a small logistic team because now we
Hmm.
need to send things and bring them back and fix them and send. So all kind of problems that we didn't face before with that magnitude that we had to think through and start providing solutions to it. And then obviously working also with partnerships. I mean, with be it logistic partners or be it
Hmm.
procurement partners. So one example, for example, is that we can now buy computers not only Metro Manila, but we can buy them also regionally, and then have our
Hmm.
logistic partner ship it directly to the person, and then have our IT team remotely set it up. So
Hmm.
all kinds of things that we had to develop, and we're still developing because it's never perfect, to be very honest. There's always some new challenge coming up
Yeah, and
along the
Philippines
way.
is an archipelago, right? I mean, you have so many islands everywhere. It takes a surprisingly long time to ship something from Manila over to like Davao or to Cebu. I was quite surprised, like the first time that that happened.
The time is one thing. The other thing, and I
Hmm.
used to work in logistics in the
Oh
Philippines when I was
yes.
still working for the Japanese. The shipping cost, let's take a big one, and
Hmm.
I'm not completely updated anymore, but it used to be a container from Japan to the Philippines was way cheaper than a container from Manila to the countryside.
Oh my
Um,
goodness.
so that's another element which people forget. The local shipping cost is also very, very high. Yeah.
Mm, mm. Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
So
And
you need to optimize it. Otherwise, it becomes very expensive.
okay. And Nicholas, I understand that Penn Brothers is now about 10 years old, right? So the company has
Correct. We're
been around for
celebrating
10 years.
actually this December. We're
Mm?
celebrating 10 years of opening our first office. Yeah.
Okay, congrats on that. So, one of
Thank
the
you.
questions I wanted to ask you, Nicholas, is how do you find that your role as a founder has evolved? Like, ever since the very start of the company until where it is today, where you have like post 1,000 employees. How has your responsibilities evolved? How do you feel that you yourself have evolved as a leader and as a person?
Oh, okay. I think I need to do a little bit more of a background. So
It's a bit more
I
of an
actually,
introspective question.
no, and it's perfectly fine. It's not that, but I need to explain that my
Hmm.
founder experience is very different to the standard you read in the news or you read in magazines or whatnot
Hmm.
about like, I had an idea. I left my company and I went to work for my own and that's what happened. And I actually chose smartly, or maybe also because I'm very opinionated about what I want to do and how I want to do things. I chose a different path.
Hmm.
I used to be business development for a Japanese company. And when I looked at the opportunity of setting up my own company with a partner,
Hmm.
it was very clear to me I don't have to do everything myself. I don't
Hmm.
need to quit my job to do only Penbrothers, which is what normally is sold to you. Quit what you're doing and become 100% founder.
Yes. You
And
you
the
didn't
reason
quit
for
your
that,
you didn't quit your job?
no, I didn't.
Like,
I did
oh,
not. I continued
okay.
working with the Japanese for another 8 years, actually. The reason
Wow.
for that is when I looked at my own role with the Japanese as a business development manager,
Hmm.
it's not like the owner of the Japanese company, would quit his role as CEO of the whole organization to build
Hmm.
a company in the Philippines or to go to
Hmm.
Singapore or to go to, he would hire people like me. So
Hmm.
one of the things we did very early, and she's a co-founder of our company. So the first thing we did, even before we started, is we hired our first employee to help
Hmm.
us set everything up, to
Okay.
help us find the office, build the office, recruit the first accounting person, and so on and so forth. So,
Hmm.
and she's still with us, and she's now a VP of transformation. So she's a
Hmm.
one level below. So she's a
Hmm.
senior leader, and we decided to build this team or to build the company by hiring the right people that we were able to afford at that time to help us
Hmm.
build this team. So my role as a founder at that time was of an advisor, um, after hours, working on it, helping with it,
So more
doing
on
a
the
lot of work.
strategic level and not on the
No,
executional
it
operational.
was also operational to a degree, but not
Okay.
day to day. And like I would
Hmm.
work, for example, a few hours in the evenings or a few hours in the mornings, or I would work on the weekends.
Hmm.
Um, so there was operation. So I was the one who would sign all the checks at that time. Everything had to be signed by check. So I would spend
Hmm.
2 hours every Friday in the office going through it with our accountant,
Hmm.
and HR team, things like that. But at the same time, it's not that I was involved every day, all the time, constantly, because we were growing it. I was growing it the same way I had grown before other companies for the Japanese employer of mine. You
Hmm.
start building a team, and then that team starts working on it, and you help with both strategic advice and also with some operational involvement. But you're not the one doing everything all the time, constantly.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
I continued to work for the Japanese. While I was doing this from 2014 until I left them 2022, I built two other companies for the Japanese, actually. So
Wow.
it's a different approach. It's maybe not the most usual approach. The downside to that, to be very honest, because it's not perfect, everything has pros and cons. So the pro is I continued to work with
Hmm.
the Japanese, so I minimized my risk. To be very
Yes.
honest,
Hmm.
the con is that at a certain point in time, I had a burnout because I
Mm.
was doing so many things that I didn't have any other thing to do besides that. So I
Hmm.
gained a lot of weight during that time. And then at a certain point in time, then COVID happened, and then there was too much of everything.
Hmm.
And only then, also because my co-founders and partners asked me like, "Hey, Nicolas, listen, can you then now move over? We have reached a size that we really need somebody like, or we believe, let me be honest, it was there, like, we believe you would be a good CEO. Can you come over?" And that also had to do because the person who was managing the day-to-day operations of the company, who was
Hmm.
critical for us to get to where we were at
Yeah,
that time, he had decided to set up his own startup in a completely different field. And he had
I
already
see.
told us, like, guys, I want to move on. It
I
was a
see.
great experience, but I want to do my
Hmm.
own startup.
Hmm.
You need to replace me. And then the conversation was, okay, how do we replace him? Do we replace him
Hmm.
with another person, external person? Do we
Hmm.
promote somebody internally? Or does one of us, so at that time we were already three, uh,
Three
three
co-founders.
founders or three
Yeah.
partners. Can one of us go over? And I was at that time the only one who was in the position to actually do that jump.
Mm-hmm.
I was ready to leave the Japanese. I was ready to jump fully into this company,
Mm-hmm.
and so the opportunity, yeah, it just happened to be that way. Yeah.
Mm. And is this something, Nicholas, that you would recommend to other people who are thinking of starting their own business, to sort of maintain a primary job while trying to build up a company on the side until the point in time that it can actually sustain them?
Yes and no. I think it depends a lot on the product you're building.
Mm-hmm.
It depends a lot on also your willingness to take risk or not to take a risk when it comes to your own income.
Mm-hmm.
I was, to be honest, a little bit more conservative, and I think it also depends at the end of the day on your willingness to then also work basically all the time for a
Mm-hmm.
certain amount of time, because you need to juggle your effect. It's not like you have a full-time job and then the founding of your own company is like a hobby. You
Mm-hmm.
need to still spend a significant amount of time working
It's
on that.
two full-time jobs basically.
Yeah, I mean, 1.5, 1.6, 1.7, sometimes two. It really depends. I mean, it's not, I don't have a perfect answer to that, but it does become a lot.
Mm.
It's not as simple. Also because you need to be fair, in my opinion. At least I was always trying to be fair. I also didn't want my other job to be impacted by me
Mm.
basically
For sure.
not doing a good job there.
Yeah.
And so that was a commitment I made to myself. It's like, I will do this, but I will make sure that my employee, sorry, my
Your
employer doesn't
employer,
suffer.
yes.
Yeah.
Mm.
So doesn't it's not like I didn't show up at work anymore and I was just like ghosting them and doing my own thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's not how I did it. So it is not as easy. Yeah.
Mm. But you said you think it would depend on product. Could you elaborate a bit more on that? What kind of product do you think that this would be possible in versus like difficult?
I think if you're growing something slower and maybe also bootstrapping it, and if you don't need to hyperscale, if it's not like, oh, I need to immediately go out there and be everywhere at the same
Mm-hmm.
time and grow this
Mm-hmm.
like crazy, then you can do it, and it's possible to do it. I think it depends a little bit on the market. It depends also on the team you can build around you.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess also the funding, let's be honest, if you don't have the money to hire somebody to actually run the operations,
Mm-hmm.
then yes, then you need to do it yourself, because you're
Mm-hmm.
the cheapest source of labor for your own company in a way. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, in a way.
Mm.
You could also turn it around and say you're the most expensive person for your own company, but that's a that's a relative thing. Depends on the
Yes.
perspective. Whereas if you raised funds with a clear selling argument to your VCs, I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
hyperscale this. I don't think the VCs will be very happy that when you then tell them like, yeah, but I'm not going to do it. I'm going to hire somebody
I'm
to
going to
do that.
hire someone to do it. And they'll be like, we'll
Yeah,
fund that person instead.
exactly. So that's a little bit also. It depends on how you're funding it. It depends on what you're doing. It depends on the external and internal pressures you're having. So if you really want to do it as quickly and as fast as possible, I guess you need to do it yourself. But if
Mm-hmm.
if this is more like a midterm, long-term project you're trying to build, then I don't see a reason why not. Yeah.
Okay, okay. Well, Nicholas, I have learned so much from you today. Like every session that I have with you, it's really an eye-opening kind of revelation because you have a very contrarian take to many of the things that I can see you smiling. But it's so true, and so it's very refreshing for me, and I'm sure for all of our listeners to hear what you had to say today as well. So, where can our listeners find you? Like, what's the best way for them to reach out to you and also to learn more about Penbrothers?
Well, honestly, I think LinkedIn is most likely the best way to find me and to also reach out to me, and to learn
Mm-hmm.
more about Penbrothers. I'm very active there, trying to explain more about the Philippines, the Filipinos, how to work with Filipinos, how to build teams here, and then
Mm-hmm.
obviously about Penbrothers itself.
Mm-hmm.
And if not, I mean, I think, yeah, I'm just one email away or one LinkedIn message away. So I think
And you
that's the
do come down
easiest
to
way.
Singapore pretty often as well, right? You
I
were
do, I do.
mentioning
Yeah, I
every
do.
two months or so.
Yes, correct. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, okay. Good that our listeners know where to reach you then. Well, Nicholas, thank you so much for coming on to
Yeah, thank
Scaling
you for your
today.
time. Thank you for having me.